The wind howled across the Bitterroot Range, kicking up dust that scraped against the windows of the Bennett homestead, like a warning from the land itself. Inside the drafty cabin, Martha Bennett tightened the shawl around her shoulders and stirred a thin pot of cornmeal mush, hoping it would stretch just enough to feed her 2 children. It had been nearly a year since Daniel, her husband, died in the dead of winter taken by pneumonia before spring could offer him another chance. Now, with only 3 scrawny cows, 6 laying hens, and a failing barn roof ready to cave at the next snowfall, Martha fought to hold together the last pieces of the life they'd built. Lucy, 12, had taken on sewing for neighbors, and Ben, just 9, chopped kindling and checked fences like a grown man. But survival out here in Wyoming Territory didn't care about age. And the tax collector from Dry Creek Crossing was due in less than 3 weeks. Martha glanced toward the west pasture, its brittle soil cracked and empty. Something had to give. She just didn't know yet that salvation was already bleeding its way toward her out of sight, but not far off. Dusk slipped quickly over the high desert, turning the horizon the color of cooling embers. Martha had barely closed the cabin door when a desperate cry shattered the evening hush. "Ma, over here, hurry!" She sprinted toward the north fence, skirts whipping her boots. 9-year-old Ben knelt beside a motionless form, half buried in sage and blowing grit. For an instant, Martha thought he'd found a bleached steer carcass, but then she caught the faint lift of a human chest. The man's appearance stole her breath. His skin was whiter than table salt, his hair a tangled spill of snow. A ragged wound oozed dark against the stark pallor of his side, and when his eyelids fluttered open she saw pupils ringed in the soft rose hue common only to albinos. No ranch hand or drifter she'd ever met looked like this. "Is he dead?" Ben whispered. "Not yet." Martha pressed 2 fingers to the stranger's throat-weak pulse, but holding. Moonlight glinted on something clutched in his blood-smeared hand. A silver pocket watch engraved to C.W. with all my love, Margot. The sight of that tender inscription kindled her resolve. Whoever he was, someone had once loved him enough to mark Silver with their heart. Leaving him meant declaring herself no better than the cold wind scouring the Bitterroot. Yet taking him in could bring every sort of trouble. Infection, starvation, the gun that had already tried once to silence him. Martha weighed those dangers in a heartbeat and chose compassion. "Help me get him home," she told Ben. They fashioned a makeshift litter from Daniel's old trail blanket and 2 fence rails. Martha lifted the head end, Ben the feet, and together they slogged the 100 yards to the cabin, every footstep planting a crimson dot in the dust. 12-year-old Lucy flung open the door, green eyes wide. "Mercy, Mama?" "Stoke the stove and fetch the boiling kettle," Martha ordered. "We'll need light, towels, and what's left of the yarrow." Inside, they eased the stranger onto the braided rag rug near the hearth. Martha sliced away the ruined vest, revealing a through-and-through wound at the rib-spleen exit, thank the Lord. She poulticed it with mashed roots, bound it tight with torn flannel, then trickled what remained of their precious willow bark tea past his cracked lips. Hours crawled by. Wind rattled loose shutters, and coyotes sang from the coulee. But the cabin stayed hushed except for the stranger's ragged breaths. Once he stirred, murmuring, "Silver Creek, they can't have it." Martha tucked the blanket tighter and exchanged a glance with Lucy. They had dragged more than a wounded man out of the dust tonight. They had hauled a mystery straight into their tiny world, and with it, though none of them yet knew a chance for every sorrow, thin dream to live again. The cabin smelled of pine pitch and damp wool as Martha worked through the night. Lucy kept the kerosene lantern trimmed high, its glow painting warm circles on the log walls, while Ben fed juniper kindling into the stove until the iron belly throbbed red-hot. Outside, the wind soughed through cottonwoods like a distant river, but inside, all sound narrowed to the stranger's ragged breaths and Martha's quiet instructions. "Boil more water, tear another strip. Easy now, Lucy," lift his shoulder. When she eased the bloody shirt from his torso, she found an old constellation of scar's knife tracks, a ridge of burn tissue, the shallow moons of buckshot. This man had lived hard long before tonight. Yet none of those marks explained the single neat bullet hole high on his ribs. Martha thanked Providence the lead had passed clean through, though it had chewed a dangerous path. She packed the wound with crushed yarrow and cedar sap, praying her frontier remedies would hold infection at bay. Sometime after midnight, the stranger began to stir. His head rolled on the folded quilt, and a hoarse whisper slipped between cracked lips. "Margot, Silver Creek, keep the papers safe." Martha froze, bloody cloth in hand. Margot was, she wife, sister, and Silver Creek, she knew that name. A high meadow 2 ridges east, rumored to sit atop a rich copper vein. Prospectors and land speculators had sniffed around there for months, pressing ranchers to sign dubious quitclaims. Her pulse quickened. Had she just brought a walking land war into her parlor? He thrashed again, pink-rimmed eyes fluttering but seeing nothing. "Can't let Blackwell win," he rasped. Ben shrank back at the menace in the words, but Martha caught the man's flailing wrist and hushed him with the same tone she'd once used on colicky calves. "Easy, mister. You're safe under this roof. Nobody here means you harm." His fingers relaxed, and Martha felt cool metal against her palm. It was a silver pocket watch, ornate yet battered, sticky with blood at the hinge. She wiped it clean on her apron. Inside the lid, elegant script glinted. "To C.W. with all my love, Margot." A small photograph, faded sepia, showed a laughing woman with dark curls and a man whose albinistic features were unmistakable even in grainy tintype. Their hands were linked as though they shared a secret only the shutter had witnessed. Lucy leaned closer, eyes shining. "Mama, that's the prettiest engraving I've ever seen." Martha closed the watch and set it on the mantel where the stranger could see it when he woke. Pretty, yes, though. Pretty things often come with bitter stories. They found more clues while changing the blood-soaked blanket. A folded map sketched in pencil on oilcloth, creased and water-stained, and beneath it a legal deed bearing a notary seal from Cheyenne. The name across the top read Caleb Whitaker. So C.W. was not just a set of initials. Somewhere beyond these hills, a Caleb Whitaker owned land valuable enough for bullets to chase him across the prairie. Ben studied the deed's bold script. If he's rich, why'd he end up alone out here? "Money can't buy trust, son," Martha answered, though she wondered if money might soon buy danger for them all. By dawn, the stranger's fever had pitched high. Martha daubed his forehead with willow bark tea, whispering psalm verses the way her mother had when typhoid swept the valley. At last the fever broke, leaving his skin clammy but his breath steadier. Exhaustion dragged at Martha's limbs, yet relief warmed her chest. He would live through the morning. She straightened Daniel's old rocking chair beside the pallet and allowed herself a single, honest breath. Somewhere beyond the cabin walls, spring would green the pastures again. But for now, 3 souls and 1 wounded mystery man shared a single fragile peace. The quiet moment before revelation or ruin came galloping over the ridge. Late morning sunlight spilled through the cabin window, turning dust motes into tiny lanterns as Martha ladled broth into a tin cup. The wounded stranger stirred, lids fluttering over pale lashes, and for the first time his gaze truly focused. Those delicate pink irises widened with a flicker of confusion, then steadied on Martha's lined yet steady face. "You're safe," she assured him, easing a folded quilt higher around his ribs. "Name's Martha Bennett. My children and I found you by the north fence last night." His throat worked, voice little more than a rasp. "How long?" Since sundown long enough to know that bullet missed anything vital. She pressed the cup to his lips. He swallowed and winced. We also know someone wanted you dead. He exhaled, half laugh, half groan. Wouldn't be the first time. Gathering what strength he had, he lifted a trembling hand. Caleb Whitaker, from Silver Creek Ridge. The name fell like a stone into quiet water. Martha felt the ripples immediately. She'd heard locals talk of Silver Creek's hidden pasture land-rich grass, fresh springs, and copper ore rumored to run beneath the granite. She had also heard the darker tales. Riders run off at gunpoint, survey stakes yanked out overnight. Silver Creek Ridge? Lucy echoed from the hearth, eyes round. Caleb's gaze shifted to the girl's curious face, then to Ben, standing protectively near the door. Something softened behind the wounded man's wary expression. "Most folks don't see many like me," he said, attempting a smile that pulled at the dried blood on his cheek. "Albinism makes a body easy to spot and easier to shun, so I built a life where no one could find me until Marcus Blackwell decided my land should be his." Martha recognized the name instantly. Blackwell owned the biggest cattle spread south of Dry Creek Crossing, and was notorious for persuading smaller ranchers to sell. She'd once watched him at an auction in town, buying a family's mortgage only to evict them the next week. Her jaw tightened. "He sent men to negotiate," Caleb continued, voice steadier now that warmth and broth settled in his belly. "When I refused, they waited for me on the trail, thought one bullet would make me change my mind." He touched the fresh bandage Martha had tied. "They would have finished the job if your boy hadn't spotted me." Ben shuffled, pride and unease wrestling on his young face. Caleb extended a hand the child's way. "Thank you, son. I owe you my life." Martha noted the old, jagged scars lacing Caleb's arms, proof he'd survived worse than ambushes. Yet she also saw the deep fatigue of a man who'd fought alone far too long. She folded the deed and map they'd discovered into a small oilcloth pouch and set it beside him. "One thing's clear," she said, voice firm as barn timber. "Blackwell won't give up, and you can't ride tonight. So you'll heal here under my roof until you're strong enough to face him. Folks like us may be small, Mr. Whitaker, but we know how to stand ground." Caleb's pale eyes shone, equal parts gratitude and disbelief. "Then, Mrs. Bennett, I reckon I finally found neighbors worth trusting." Outside, the Wyoming wind gusted again, as if to seal their pact and usher in whatever trials lay ahead. 3 days later, dawn broke the way it often does on the high plain, sharp and glittering, as if the sun were a fresh minted coin tossed onto a table of blue steel. Caleb Whitaker slept fitfully on the pallet near the stove, color easing back into his cheeks, but Martha's instincts wouldn't let her rest. She rose before first light, checked the wound pink around the edges but clean, then stepped onto the porch with her coffee tin and a hickory stock Winchester across one arm. A dry hush hung in the air, no meadowlarks, no distant cattle lowing, just that eerie stillness the old-timers said meant something was on its way. By mid-morning, Lucy was mending Ben's shirt at the kitchen table, while her brother practiced whittling a pine stick into what he swore would be a fine-handled spoon. Caleb dozed, lulled by the smell of bacon rinds simmering for supper stock. Martha had just added a log to the stove when she heard Hoofbeatslow, deliberate, the way men ride when they want their presence announced mile wide. She caught Ben's eye, gave a silent nod toward the loft. The boy hustled up the ladder with the rifle cartridges they'd kept hidden in an earthen crock. Lucy, calm as a seasoned ranch wife despite being 12, doused the bacon fire so the cabin wouldn't reek of fresh cooking. Martha stepped outside, the Winchester cradled casual-like but ready. 3 riders eased up to the gate, wiry horses lathered at the chest, their tack dusty but expensive. The lead mantle-brimmed hat pulled low-tipped the edge of it with mock politeness. A jagged scar split his chin, giving him a permanent half-snarl. "Morning, ma'am," he drawled. "Fine day for neighbors checking in." "We don't get many," Martha answered, voice even, thumb resting on the rifle's safety but near enough to the trigger. "State your business." "We're hunting a fugitive." Scar Chin slid a wanted poster from his saddlebag and flicked it open. The sketch roof, but unmistakable, showed a pale-skinned man with white hair. Caleb Whitaker. Dead or alive. Reward, $500. Enough money to tilt the world of any drifter from Cheyenne to Tombstone. "Ain't seen him," Martha said, letting her gaze travel from the poster to each rider's gun belt. "Colts, well-oiled. Only folks on this spread are me, my children, and a hired hand too old to run from anything, let alone the law." The second man, a squat fellow, with eyes like cold marble-spat tobacco juice into the dust. "Mind if we water our stock?" "You're 6 miles from Dry Creek Crossing," Martha replied. "Plenty of creeks between here and there. My well's barely keeping my family's stock alive." She didn't mention the truth. The well was nearly bone-dry. Scar Chin's smile thinned. "That so? Land tax coming due, I hear. Shame if the bank took this place after all your hard work." He let the words settle like rattlesnake coils between them. Inside, Caleb had awakened to the rumble of voices. He rose too quickly, pain lancing his side, but steadied against the wall. Through the wavy glass pane he saw the riders and Martha's rigid posture courage stitched to caution. He reached for his holster on the chair, found it empty, then spotted Lucy in the shadowed loft, Henry rifle sighted through a crack. The girl met his eyes, nodded once. "We've got this." Something inside Caleb, long calloused by solitude, ached at that simple trust. Outside, Martha breathed slow, the way Daniel had taught her when teaching her to shoot. Slow heart, steady hand. She leveled the Winchester just enough to show she could shoulder it in half a heartbeat. "Gentlemen, my children are inside. I'd take it kindly if you'd ride on." For a moment, no one moved. Even the wind stilled. Then Scar Chin chuckled, but there was no mirth in it. "Reckon hospitality's dead in these parts." He wheeled his horse. "We'll be back, ma'am. Word is that Albino ain't far, and folks protecting him might end up on the wrong side of Blackwell's ledger." They turned, spurs chinking, dust rising behind them like a promise. Martha watched until they dipped below the ridge, then exhaled the breath she'd been holding since the first hoofbeat. Inside, Ben scrambled down the ladder, cheeks flushed with adrenaline. Lucy set the rifle butt safe on the floor. Caleb leaned in the doorway, hand pressed to his bandage, admiration shining through pain. "Mrs. Bennett," he said, voice hoarse but steady, "I've stood with Pinkerton men and U.S. Marshals who showed less grit." Martha propped the Winchester by the door. "Grit's cheap out here, Mr. Whitaker. What costs is keeping it when the next ride? Up comes, and I reckon they will." She looked at her children, then at Caleb. "So, let's plan for what's coming, because this family's got no room for fear, only room for strategy." Caleb straightened as best he could. "Then, ma'am, consider me family from this day forward." The pact sealed itself in the quiet that followed, stronger than iron, sure as sunrise on the Wyoming range. Sunup the next day found Caleb Whitaker seated at Martha's kitchen table, still pale but upright, the bandage at his ribs freshly wrapped. Outside, Lucy and Ben hauled water from the hand-pump Pevery slosh in the bucket, reminding Martha that their well was barely 2 feet from showing sand. She poured Caleb a mug of chicory and braced herself for the conversation she sensed was coming. "I meant what I said on the porch," he began, fingers tracing the grain of the scarred pine tabletop. "Your family risked everything to shelter a man you'd never met. That deserves more than thanks." He slid a folded paper across the boards of bank draft from Cheyenne Territory Bank, stamped and sealed. "Enough here to clear every cent of back taxes, plus freight on new lumber and shingles for your barn." Martha's breath caught. The overdue notice pinned over the hearth had weighed on her like a millstone for months. Still, pride flared. Mr. Whitaker, I won't have my children thinking their mother traded kindness for coin. Caleb shook his head. Not charity investment. He produced a second document, a partnership contract written in tidy legal script. Silver Creek Ridge borders your north pasture. I've got 3,000 acres of prime grazing and bloodlines the railroad towns will pay top dollar for, but I need a family rooted here to help rebuild. You know the land. I supply the capital and stock. Profits split 60-40 you, taking the greater share until your homestead is sound. 60-40. The figure rattled around Martha's mind like loose nails in a coffee can. With that cut, she could sink a new well, repair the collapse-prone roof, maybe even buy Lucy the spectacles she'd been squinting without. Yet memories of Daniel sharpening plow blades by lantern light rose unbidden. He'd sworn their place would never be beholden to any man. She folded her hands to still their shake. I answer to my own name, Mr. Whitaker. Caleb studied her, soft pink eyes, clear and earnest. And I mean for it to stay that way. You lead this outfit, Martha. I'm done fighting alone. He set Daniel's mended work glove on the contract, a gesture of respect she couldn't miss. Let me rebuild what Blackwell tried to burn. Together we'll show him this ridge answers to better men and stronger women. A floorboard creaked. Ben stood in the doorway, clutching an empty bucket, hope bright on his freckled face. Lucy hovered behind. The overdue notice clutched like a verdict. Martha felt her resistance crumble. She dipped the pen Caleb offered, signed Martha J. Bennett, with a steadier hand than she expected, and slid the agreement back. Caleb exhaled, relief and gratitude mingling. First order of business, he said, rising slowly, is sending a rider to Cheyenne with that draft. By the time Blackwell hears, the county ledger will show this ranch paid in full. Martha met his gaze, something fierce and determined sparking between them. And the second order? Building a future, Caleb answered, smiling at the children peering in. One cedar post, one newborn calf, one honest day's work at a time. By the first week of June, the Bennett place buzzed like a new-built hive. 2 freight wagons rumbled in from Cheyenne, loaded with cedar posts, roof shingles, and 3 prized Hereford heifers. Caleb's down payment on the partnership. Ben, wide-eyed, counted each bundle of lumber as if tallying treasure, while Lucy hovered over receipts, copying figures into a fresh ledger book that Caleb had stamped with the gold letters, Morning Glory Ridge. It was the first time she had ever kept accounts on clean pages instead of scraps of newspaper, and she handled the volume with the awe of someone turning scripture. Caleb moved carefully, favoring his healing side, but he was everywhere at once, showing the hired carpenters how to sister new rafters onto the sagging barn frame, measuring the distance for a deeper well, teaching Ben to judge a colt's withers before choosing a saddle blanket. The boys soaked up every word. When Caleb demonstrated how to calm a skittish filly hand low, voice lower, Ben mirrored the slow movements until the animal's ears flicked forward and the tension drained from her neck. Horses read your heartbeat, Caleb told him. Learn to slow it, and you can guide anything on 4 legs. Lucy's lessons were quieter, but no less transformative. Each afternoon, Caleb spread the breeding record forms across the kitchen table, explaining columns for birth, weight, milk yield, and bloodline. Numbers, which had once felt thorny and abstract to her, began to braid into patterns that made sense. With Caleb's coaching, she recalculated the feed ratio for the entire herd, shaving 3 sacks of oats off the monthly estimate. When she presented her findings, Caleb whistled low. That right there is the difference between scraping by and getting ahead. Martha watched her daughter's shoulders straighten, pride glowing brighter than any lantern. Evenings settled into a gentle rhythm. After supper, Martha rocked on the porch with needlework while Caleb tuned Daniel's weather-beaten guitar. The children chased lightning bugs across the yard until dark, laughter ringing against the distant hills. Sometimes, Caleb would pick a slow hymn Margot had loved, and Martha, eyes on the horizon, would hum the harmony she once sang beside Daniel. Sorrow did not vanish, but it felt less like a stone in her pocket and more like a smooth river, pebble still there, yet polished by new waters. The test of their fledgling unity came late one afternoon, when a dry thunderhead cracked open above the hayfield. A lightning bolt speared the stacked bales, setting them ablaze in an instant. Caleb's shout cut through the roar of wind. "Bucket line, Ben opened the sluice gate to the spring ditch. Loosegate the oilskins over the horse tack." They had drilled for fire only twice, but the children moved as if born to it. Ben raced for the gate lever, muscles straining. Muddy water gushed down the furrow and pooled at the barn wall, blocking the flames' advance. Lucy flung drenched tarps across the tack racks, then joined her mother at the pump, passing buckets hand over hand until the hay fire hissed into steam. When the danger passed, they stood in crescent moonlight, smoke drifting like incense over the blackened patch. Caleb rested a steadying hand on Ben's shoulder. Lucy leaned against Martha, chest heaving but triumphant. "That," Caleb said, voice rough with pride, "is what a family looks like, everyone knowing their part and seeing it through." Ben glanced up. "Does that make you our family, Mr. Whitaker?" Caleb's reply was quiet but certain. "If you'll have me, son, I reckon it does." Martha felt something shift inside Hera click, as sure as a latch settling into place. She reached for Caleb's hand, calloused palm meeting her weathered fingers, and for the first time since Daniel's passing, she allowed herself to imagine a future woven with fresh threads instead of mended seams. The moon hung full over the bitterroot, staining the high clouds the color of tarnished silver. Martha had just banked the stove and sent the children to bed when a distant pop split the quiet too sharp for a fence board, too flat for thunder. Caleb, already uneasy, eased to the window. In the wavering lantern glow, he saw orange fingers licking the far end of the south pasture. Another gunshot cracked, closer this time. "They're here," he breathed. Within moments, the drills they'd practiced for weeks snapped into motion. Martha roused Lucy and Ben. Caleb swung the Henry rifle he kept behind the door, the barrel still warm from a cleaning he'd finished only hours earlier. Outside, hoofbeats fanned out in a semicircle Blackwell's riders, maybe a dozen, their silhouettes darting like wolves around the firelit grass. Sheriff Miller had promised night patrols, but they were 3 miles off. For now, the family stood alone. Caleb pressed a rifle into Lucy's steady hands. "Loft window, remember aim low, scare, don't kill unless you must." She nodded, braids swinging as she clambered up the ladder. Ben grabbed buckets and sprinted to the new spring-fed cistern, heart-hammering but movement sure. Then came the true assault. Riders thundering toward the barn, torches flaring. Caleb fired a warning shot that shattered a torch head, sparks flying harmlessly into the dirt. "That's Whitaker," someone yelled. "Take him first." 2 figures peeled off, spurring straight at the porch. Martha Winchester braced against the doorframe, let loose a single round that splintered the lead rider's reins. His horse reared, dumping him headfirst into a mesquite stump. The second man skirted wide, cursing, and disappeared into the orchard. Meanwhile, Ben had thrown the sluice lever. A sheet of icy water rushed downhill, quenching the pasture blaze before it could jump the ditch. Lucy's measured shots pinged off the iron gate hinges, forcing the attackers to duck. Their surprise had evaporated. Now they milled in confusion, targets suddenly vulnerable on open ground. One by one they wheeled away, retreating toward the ridge where they'd gathered. A last torch arced through the night, landing on the barn roof, but Caleb was already there. Despite the pain in his healing side, he clambered onto the water barrel, slammed the roof with a wet gunny sack until the flame fizzled to smoke. When he dropped back to earth, breath ragged, Ben ran to him, eyes shining with relief and something more. "Papa, you're bleeding again." The word "papa" rang louder than any rifle crack. Caleb stilled, surprise softening the battle-set lines of his face. "I'll be all right, son," he said, voice thick. He pulled the boy close, a rough embrace that smelled of gunpowder and damp hay. Martha crossed the yard, Lucy trailing behind, rifle finally lowered. In the smoldering dark, with the farmhouse still standing and Blackwell's men reduced to distant hoofbeats, they formed a tight circle, 4 hearts thudding, one promise, unspoken yet understood. Whatever came next, they would face it as a family, bonded by blood, choice, and the fire they had just survived together. The morning after the raid, golden light spilled across the yard, turning last night's scorched earth into stepping stones of amber. Caleb rose early. Despite the fresh stitches, Sheriff Miller's doctor had set 6 neat ones, each barely an inch long then, limp to the small cedar chest beneath the window. Inside lay Daniel Bennett's wedding band, dulled by time but still warm with memory. Lucy had tucked it there the night Caleb arrived. "Just in case," she'd whispered. Martha found him on the porch, ring cradled between his thumb and forefinger. The hush between them held a dozen unspoken truths. Gunsmoke still lingered in the barn rafters. Blackwell nursed wounds but wasn't finished. And yet, in that fragile pause, the future felt wide as the Wyoming sky. "I've carried Margot's loss like a stone," Caleb began, voice rough with August gravel. "Then you and the children showed me stones can build foundations too." He knelt slowly, minding the stitch of sand, slipped Daniel's ring onto Martha's hand. "Will you let me help raise the roof on this life we're building?" Tears blurred Martha's view of the ridgeline. She thought of Daniel's unyielding strength, of Margot's tender inscription in the pocket watch, of the way last night Lucy had called down from the loft. "Fire's out, Papa." Love, she realized, wasn't a ledger that balanced. It was a river that widened to carry every tributary. She whispered, "Yes'm, one condition." Across the threshold, Lucy and Ben hovered, holding a neatly folded document Caleb had drafted weeks earlier but never dared present. Adoption papers, Territory of Wyoming, June 1875. Martha placed her palm over the bold type. "Our children keep Bennett as a middle name, so their father rides with them always, but they'll answer to Whitaker too, if their hearts say so." Ben grinned through freckles. "We already decided, Mama." That afternoon, they hammered a fresh sign onto the front gate, cedar planks branded with a curling vine of blue paint. "Morning Glory Ridge Home of the Whitaker, Bennett family." As a breeze lifted across the pasture, Martha noticed real Morning Glory seedlings spiraling up the fence posts. Lucy had planted them in secret after hearing Caleb's stories of Margot's favorite bloom. When the petals finally opened, they would unfurl toward the sunrise, claiming the new name, just as surely as the family who had chosen it, proving that love, once planted, can root in the toughest ground and blossom again. 1 year later, the late summer sun slid low across Morning Glory Ridge, turning the wheat a soft bronze and setting the barn's new tin roof aglow. Inside the freshly whitewashed parlor, Martha rocked in Daniel's old chair, a quilt stretched across her growing belly, while Caleb added the final lines to a leather-bound journal. Lucy, now 13, balanced a ledger on her knees, double-checking the calf weights she'd recorded that morning. Ben, a sturdy 10, guided his chisel along a cradle rail he'd carved from juniper's curve, etched with tiny Morning Glory blossoms. Outside, the Hereford herd nudged against the corral rails, sleek coats proof that good pasture and steadier times had at last found them. Caleb set down his pen and read aloud. "Love built this ranch board by board, heartbeat by heartbeat. The Bennett name steadies our roots, and the Whitaker name lifts our branches." Martha felt tears brim, not from sorrow this time, but from gratitude big enough to ache. She thought of the night a dying albino stranger bled onto her rag rug, of how fear and kindness had wrestled in her chest until kindness won, and of every dawn since that had widened the circle of their family. As dusk settled, they gathered on the porch to watch the first stars pierce the sky. Ben's finished cradle sat at their feet, sturdy and waiting. Lucy tucked the ledger under her arm and linked elbows with her mother. Caleb slipped an arm around Martha's shoulders and whispered, "Daniel would be proud. We kept his promise to these hills." She squeezed his hand, and Margot would be proud that her flowers guard the gate. A soft wind carried the scent of sage and sun-warmed pine, reminding them that hardship could return with the next storm. Yet the lesson Morning Glory Ridge had taught them was clear. Kindness given in uncertainty has a way of returning as strength in abundance. When you choose to stand together, neighbors, kin, even strangers, you turn shaky ground into bedrock and grief into a harvest. Dear friends, especially those seasoned by many hard winters, never underestimate how one act of compassion can rewrite destiny. You may feel your own resources, time, strength, money are too thin to share, but kindness multiplies itself. Martha risked her last bowl of stew and her fragile sense of safety. What she gained was a new husband, secure children, and a ranch reborn. So if life lays a wounded soul at your doorstep, remember Morning Glory Ridge. Open the door, offer what little you have. The return may bloom into blessings you never dared imagine. If this story touched your heart, let us know in the comments. Have you ever received or given help that changed everything? Your experiences inspire others more than you know. And if you'd like more frontier tales filled with courage, romance, and second chances, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Together, we'll keep the spirit of hope and the wide-open West alive for generations to come.